Greetings and bienvenue, midnight crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I would like to raise one topic, which for some reason I did not find on the English-speaking internet. Maybe I just didn't know how. We have a discussion about this feeling on DVAC, Russian-speaking image board, if anyone doesn't know, for 3 years now. We call it a fear of noon. This feeling is very hard to explain. Perhaps one post-it from the book will help. There is a particular fear of the afternoon hours, when brightness, silence, and heat approach the limit. When Pan plays the pipe, when the day reaches its full intensity. On such a day, you walk through a meadow or through a rare forest without thinking about anything. Butterflies fly carefree, ants run across the path, and grasshoppers jump out from under your feet. Day stands at its highest point, warm and blissful, like in a bath. Flowers amaze you with their aroma. How wonderful, intense, and free they live. There is no one around, and the only sound that accompanies you is the sound of your own working heart. Suddenly, a premonition of irreparable misfortune covers you. Time is preparing to stop. The day is filled with lead for you. Catalepsy of the time. The world stands before you like a muscle cramped in a cramp, like a pupil dumbfounded by tension. Oh my God, what a desolate stillness, what a dead bloom all around. The bird flies in the sky, and with horror you notice its flight is motionless. The dragonfly grabbed the midge and gnaws off her head, and both of them, and the dragonfly and midge, are completely motionless. How did you not notice that nothing is happening in the world and cannot happen? It has been like this before and will be forever and ever. And not even now, not before, nor forever and ever. Just not to guess about yourself, that you are the same, then it's over. There will be no return. Is there really no salvation from the bewitched world? The ossified pupil will swallow you too. With horror you are waiting for the release of the explosion. And the explosion breaks out. Explosion breaks out. Yes, someone is calling you by your name. Gogol has this, however. The ancient Greeks also knew this feeling. They called it a meeting with Pan, a panicky horror. This is the fear of noon. You are in stagnant water. This is solid water that closes over your head like a stone. This happens where there is no separation, no change, no life. For example, a sunny day, where light, smell, warmth at the limit, stand like thick rays, like horns. A cohesive world without gaps, without pores, there is no different quality in it, and, therefore, time, individuality cannot exist. Because if everything's the same, immeasurable, then there are no differences. Nothing exists. But who at the last moment called you by your name? Of course, you yourself. In mortal fear, you remembered the last divider, yourself. With both hands grabbed your soul. Be proud, you were present at the opposite rotation. Before your eyes, the world was turning into what it arose from, into its original one material foundation. At that moment, you met not only with Pan, but also with your own soul. What a weak voice she has, weak, but rather pleasant. Fear of lack of individuality also explains hostility to open continuous spaces. Monotonous water or snow deserts. Large bare mountains, steppes without flowers. Blue or white sky. Landscapes too saturated with the sun. The majestic is always stern and uncomfortable. Oh, the particular longing of the southern countries, where nature is excessively strong and life is surprisingly shameless, so that a person is lost in it and is ready to cry from despair. Tropical longing finds its expression in the hysteria inherent in the southern peoples. In fits of dance or jerking, when a person runs without stopping with a knife in his hand, he wants to cut open, to tear apart the continuity of the world, runs, killing everything in his way. While they won't kill him, or bloody foam will not pour out of his mouth. Snow melancholy is known to winterers of polar stations. It also causes convulsive dances and a special Meneric disease, in which a person, unable to stand the eternal night, leaves the parking lot directly in the darkness, in the snow, to death. Leonid Lepavsky, Faces of Fear. Description of this feeling by Anon. If you know the feeling of the upcoming disaster on a hot summer day, if you are alarmed by the rustle of trees in the silence of a sultry noon, if you see something sinister in the scorched colors of summer stuffiness, welcome. Here is an example of this feeling. Imagine a nice summer day, around it is bright and sunny. The trees are slightly noisy from the wind. There are no other sounds at all. Suddenly, everything fades before your eyes and a thin, growing noise appears, which grows slowly, slowly. So slowly that it drives you crazy. I think in this case this feeling is connected with the fear of the end of the world, in particular, the nuclear apocalypse. Or there is a feeling that something strange is happening now. For example, that the cause of your death will come to you. You're now obsessed with dread that now you have to die because of some stupid accident. For example, a tree will fall on you, under which you are sitting, or a cat passing by will be infected with rabies and bite you. Or that guy in a white t-shirt and gray jeans will stab you with a knife for no reason at all. You're doomed, but you don't know why, you don't see a cause of disaster. Everything seems okay. Most often, a feeling arises when you are alone, but not necessarily. And it's not an agoraphobia, we discussed it already. We don't feel it constantly when we are walking on the empty streets or standing in the field. This happens occasionally. Most common triggers. 1. Dense blue to black cloudless sky under the scorching sun. 2. White, sand or terracotta buildings in the middle of empty space. 3. Simple, clear, strict forms, a cube, box, ball, pyramid. Some palaces with stucco do not trigger like that. 4. High contrast, bright light and black shadows. 5. There should be no people, but some lonely figure can enhance this feeling. 6. Copy-paste of objects. For example, identical buildings in a row. 7. The presence of any dark pits, openings, holes enhances this feeling. Common landscapes that many people have dreamed or in which they have experienced this feeling IRL. 1. An endless field flooded with sunlight, especially before a thunderstorm. 2. Field with power lines. 3. A lonely building in the middle of the field. For some reason, usually white. We don't know why though. Dreamed of very many experiencing this feeling. The feeling that there is some kind of evil in the house or that a bad accident will happen there. Or already had happened. 4. Pyramids, clay huts, old temples, statues, or simply stones of strange shapes in the middle of a desert or plateau. 5. Soviet buildings such as palaces, department stores, etc., with all these columns, cubes, stone plateaus and other manifestations of megalomania. Often mixed with an acute sense of nostalgia for something lost. Probably, that's fair only to us, because, well, we live here. Lol. 6. Sunlit deserted yards of panels. 7. Lonely figures of people in the midst of such landscapes, looking off into the distance or running away from something that we don't see. And to triggers. 1. Water. The sea, pools, rivers, lakes practically negate the effect, with minimal exceptions. 2. In some cases, greens, trees, bushes, flowers, etc., but sometimes it enhances the effect. Depends. 3. People, animals. A life. 4. Clouds. 5. Many colors, liveliness of the picture. Design composition. In general, a classic landscape. And here are some stories of the Anons themselves that describe their experience. Yes, I have something on this subject. Not like in daylight, and it wasn't that scary. But this is one of the most disturbing, painful, depressing atmospheres. Not far from the place where I live, a new apartment area was built. Typical 9-floor buildings, fresh painted, with courtyards, lighting. Ready for people to move in. So one warm spring or summer day, we somehow went there with a couple of friends. It was evening, the sky had already darkened considerably, turned gray. The air became warm, heavy. We decided to shorten our path through one of these courtyards. And now we are walking along the porches, freshly painted walls, benches and fences. Street lamps brightly illuminate everything around us with their yellowish light. Around silence, and against the background you can hear this city noise, so distant, merging almost into a quiet hum. It was here, in the bright light of the lanterns, under the gray sky. I felt uneasy. I don't know, in this whole situation there was something unnatural. Something unhealthy in the bright colors and the complete absence of people in this environment. Which usually should be a lot of people, on the contrary. Do you understand me? I touched this atmosphere in the game cry of fear. When monsters suddenly popped up on an empty evening street. But the situation was not the same, the streets were not alike. My road to the postal building runs through residential buildings with a kindergarten, and they form corridors. Their cherry trees grow under the windows. I constantly eat cherries along the way. So, just go there, all the sounds immediately become much quieter. Very few people pass by, and almost never hear anything from the windows. No TV. No conversations, no barking dogs. Nothing. And when it's noon, this place is flooded with an avalanche of light, and all the shadows are so dark, almost black. The windows of the apartment house go directly to the kindergarten, from the fence to the windows 5 or 6 meters. It is very convenient for any creep from this house to watch the children. There is a feeling that people can disappear here. In general, it's very uncomfortable to be there.
About 11 to 12 years ago, I rode a bicycle from my summer house to hell knows where. It was hot, just like now in Moscow. I already drove onto the highway. I traveled along the railway tracks. Lonely houses went into the distance. Why did people leave this village? Someone told stories about some kind of radiation, electricity. But this is nothing more than rumors. After I passed the road and ended up on the highway, I saw a power line. It was downstairs, almost beneath me, but it seemed so far away. All these electric towers. A metal mesh netting looked rather creepy against the backdrop of a clean, hot day. But next I got a lump in my throat. I was even sickened by the experienced horror. In the very far distance, I saw a hangar of some fantastic size. I left very fast from there. Never came back again.
So this fear is in our genes. If the phenomenon is known even to the ancient Greeks. I often had a dream earlier that I was walking on a sunny summer day through a meadow. In the sky there were some beautiful clouds, but something was off. I climbed the slope of a steep hill, and from it some kind of metal or concrete structure is visible in the distance. It seems to me that I will reach it, and there it is cool and you can hide from the sun. But I can't get there. I'm walking and walking, but the building is not getting closer, and I begin feel a panic attack.
Scary. We rarely have clear days in our city in winter. Maybe that's why. Although not quite winter, but early spring, all around in melted black and gray snow. Bare trees, the crumbling courtyards of a small town. Not a soul in the streets. And here peeps bright as welding. The disturbing sun and floods all this idyllic landscape. I remember this with a friend in childhood. We walked along the street, went around several blocks, did not see a single car and not a single person. Panic escalated. It seemed that even talking is becoming difficult. As if the sound is spreading as hard as in water. It seemed that we were about to disappear. I am 5 years old. Heat. Country house. Only potatoes are growing. In the corner stands a stone house, which was built by grandfather. From one end of the cottage to the other 50 meters, behind the flimsy grid, the cottage of neighbors, and a scarecrow, is forever following me. Crossing the road alone is unrealistic. With adults it's scary.
Opus, you pulled some stuff out of my mind. I live in the Southern Federal District. On a summer afternoon here you can easy fry eggs on asphalt and take X-ray photographs with the sun. So, I really love to hang around the local fields. And at some distance from the city, I noticed a very unusual place. Imagine. Forest belt. Fruit planting. Summer. Noon. Wind, grasshoppers, foliage rustling, humming power lines. Everything is perfectly visible. There is nobody around. There seems to be nothing to be afraid of. But, holy shit, every time I go there, my hair literally stands even on my ass. I want to plug my ears, close my eyes, yell and run away from there. So it goes. I plan to somehow spend the night there, such as who and whom.
Opus, burn in hell. A nice summer day. Around it is bright light. The trees make a little noise from the wind. There are no other sounds. At all. Suddenly everything fades in front of my eyes and a thin, growing noise appears. An obsession comes up that now you have to die because of some stupid accident. For example, a tree you're sitting under. I dreamed it. In general, when I was a little kid about 3 or 5 years old, I had a recurring nightmare that almost every night consistently turned on in my head on the verge of sleep and reality. It was not even a dream. Sleepy paralysis. Yeah. The plot is a nice summer day. It is light, warm, calm, the sun is shining. The birds are singing, the grasshoppers are chirping, the bees are buzzing, and everything is so good. But there is a feeling of an inevitable sinister event. And he comes. Some strange noise slowly grows up. Scary, to hysteria, and then some guy with a chainsaw appears. Noise, hell, trees fall on your head, death, ah. In my opinion, the main difference is that at night you are afraid for yourself. That is, now some sort of maniac or creature will come out and kill you. The danger is more or less specific. It comes from the darkness and is directed at you. Midday fear is something else. He is much stronger. There are no apparent reasons for him, and you are not afraid for your existence, but for the existence of the world in general. I don't know when I feel this. It seems to me that the fate of the universe itself will be decided now. It will either irreversibly change or disappear, and will be erased. In short, let it sound pathetic, but in general, this is fear for the universe itself? I would say so. The fear that the familiar form of the world will end.
I noticed in the thread before that a frequent element of such fear is some massive object in the middle of something boundless. Here is this post with a hangar in an abandoned village, fear of power lines, dreams about lonely houses in the middle of the field.
There is a small story. I was in Britain, in the small town of Bournemouth, once in the afternoon. I walked along winding streets, each with rows of houses and small courtyards, with fences, stone walls, hedges, in short, pick-related. The weather is hot. There's not a soul around at all. Nobody goes on the roads, only bees and bumblebees rush between the flower beds. And then a melody starts to play from somewhere, like a van with an ice cream from a movie. And it drilled the brain that you know it, but you can't remember where it came from. It was creepy. But too much, I went to the sound, but in general it was difficult to understand where it came from. As if this ice cream man walks around you in circles. I walked for about 20 minutes. The music subsided, then returned, but even when I spat and returned home, I could hear it. As a result, it somehow quietly stopped. When the owners returned, I lived with an elderly couple. I asked them about ice cream bands and music, but they did not know anything. Then all evening on the internet I was looking for a melody. But I did not find one. In general, in that town, if you get away from the coast, where there are shops and a crowd of students, beach people, there was always such a deserted atmosphere, so you expect to see Dumbledore in a pointed hat and he will steal the battery charge from the phone. And none of the neighbors behind the hedges won't know. Does anyone even live in these houses?
As a child, I had the same dream many times in a row. The essence of the dream, I ended up in the near future. In my small poor town, went to my apartment, but strangers opened up to me there and say that my relatives have long been dead. After that I wander around and think about what I should do next. Atmosphere, noon, unnaturally bright sun, many flowers around in old houses painted in white. No people around, complete hopelessness. I will remember this atmosphere forever.
When I was a small kid, in the summer we went to the cottage. There have always been moments when I was very uneasy. Given that there is generally quite deserted, a small village and almost always sunny in the warm season, this adds to the atmosphere. There was always time, usually afternoon, at 2 or 3 o'clock, when the sun was still high. The heat was heavy. Everyone had luncheon, like sleepy flies, spread to their corners. Almost all of my neighbors had the same time for this, so getting someone out to play was impossible. I usually sat in the attic or climbed out into the garden on a swing, took with me a stack of Soviet magazines such as Science and Life and read. And at that time there was always a feeling of some thick and viscous time, which seemed to stop, and at once all the trees and all kinds of insects seemed not real, but some kind of decorations. And there was a feeling that nothing will never happen, that there are no more your friends, parents, or neighbors. Even the dog has disappeared somewhere. I always waited for the heat to go, and activity would begin again. Mother and grandmother would get out into the garden to dig in their vegetables. Dad would go out for beer. Friends would get out for a walk and swim. All this movement started in the late afternoon. When in some book about the Soviet children camp I read the phrase dead time in relation to afternoon sleep, and since then this image has not come out of my head. Such an endless summer.
Once in my life I felt like that. In short, I was 16. Then, I lived with my parents and constantly smoked. Somehow all my relatives went to the cottage, and I stayed at home because the New Year holidays. The house and the computer at my disposal, all that. January. The year 2005. I go out onto the balcony with a cigarette in my mouth, overflowing with the anticipation of a great vacation and a feeling of complete freedom. But while I was striking a lighter, all this buzz disappeared. Because, imagine such a picture: clear sky, sparkling snow, bright sun, and just a deafening creak of a lighter in absolute silence. Of course, holidays. Everyone went wherever. But even the birds would not tweet. And if you take into account that my outskirts are almost under the window, then the prolonged silence of more than 10 seconds was something abnormal. No human voices. No wind noise, quiet as in a coffin. And, together with this silence, the radiance of fresh snow under the winter sun in contrast with the blue sky seemed somehow unnatural. as if ridiculously bright scenery instead of the real world. Were it all at night, it would not be half so scary, because such quietness is natural for the night. And then I vividly imagined that not only the surroundings had turned into decoration, but all the people in their apartments are now frozen in dynamic poses, and for some reason I did not freeze and thereby made a terrible mistake. Because they're about to begin in this silence, there are deft steps of something huge in the distance. Then a figure as tall as a couple of skyscrapers will begin to emerge from the blueness of this fake sky. And the steps will slowly and gradually begin to grow louder, and in this silence everything will be heard perfectly. Well then, someone slammed the car door under my balcony and the illusion collapsed. I quite easily threw all these unpleasant sensations out of my head. I'm not afraid to go out, and on such days I don't pull the curtains. But every time on winter sunny days I sometimes feel something like that, and at such moments, I quickly translate thoughts into something abstract, so that those feelings would not be repeated. Sometimes I scroll this memory at night. It's not so scary. Now I have, by the way, gray sky and rain outside the window, otherwise I would have started to pull the described impressions out.
What is the horror of noon? Some people ask here. Bright sunny day. You are walking around the city. Green trees, trams ring. The bright sun and almost no people, and not even a lot of cars. And suddenly, all the sounds around seem to die and almost ringing in silence. You look around and understand that this should not be. And it can't. And the feeling of something terrible is coming. You feel like Sarah Connor in the playground, a second before a nuclear explosion. And then suddenly all the sounds come back and this feeling goes away. I remember one of those days, too bright, poisonous sun, at home, and suddenly this feeling. Silence. Unnatural silence. Further events unfold in seconds. Suddenly a motorcycle enters the courtyard, some kind of drunk ant, throws a bag in the face of the driver. He loses control and, together with the passenger, crashes into the wall at high speed. Howl, screams. It is on such a sunny day that the screams are especially audible, as if everything around is the scenery for this drama. I'm a little boy. I went to the other end of the city to buy some kind of trinket. Sunny day. What an unnatural summer day. Too much sun. Unnatural silence in the air. I'm running back home and suddenly I see how it seems to me a familiar house and shop, and I think, maybe I somehow cut the road. Although I seem to understand with my mind that I couldn't be near this house without speed and transport, but I turned out to be. I rush to this house. There is dead silence. The sun. And I wander into the yards and understand that this is not the house that seemed to me. Then I run further in that direction. For some reason it seems to me that this is how I will cut the path. I find myself on some sort of railroad. I run on rails. A worker sits there and he just silently looks at me and says nothing and does not even blink. As if frozen. I run past. The sun is blinding. I see an old poster, Glory to some Congress of the CPSU Central Committee. And suddenly I feel horror. I stop. And at that moment, in this silence, I hear a scream, "Boy, stop!" Running workers in orange robes. The wire came off. If I ran further, I would be screwed. That's why I feel the horror of the day.
What is the horror of noon? Bright sunny day. You are walking around the city. Green trees, trams ring. The bright sun and almost no people. And not even a lot of cars. And suddenly, all the sounds around seem to die and almost ring in silence. You look around and understand that this should not be. And it can't. And the feeling of something terrible is coming. You feel like Sarah Connor in the playground, a second before a nuclear explosion. And then suddenly all the sounds come back and this feeling goes away. I remember one of those days, too bright, poisonous sun. At home, and suddenly this feeling. Silence. Unnatural silence. Further events unfold in seconds. Suddenly a motorcycle enters the courtyard. Some kind of drunk ant throws a bag in the face of the driver. He loses control and, together with the passenger, crashes into the wall at high speed. Howl, screams. It is on such a sunny day that the screams are especially audible, as if everything around is the scenery for this drama. I'm a little boy. I went to the other end of the city to buy some kind of trinket. Sunny day. What an unnatural summer day. Too much sun. Unnatural silence in the air. I'm running back home and suddenly I see how it seems to me a familiar house and shop, and I think, maybe I somehow cut the road. Although I seem to understand with my mind that I couldn't be near this house without speed and transport. But I turned out to be. I rushed to this house. There is dead silence. the sun, and I wander into the yards and understand that this is not the house that seemed to me. Then I run further in that direction. For some reason it seems to me that this is how I will cut the path. I find myself on some sort of railroad. I run on rails. A worker sits there and he just silently looks at me and says nothing and does not even blink, as if frozen. I run past. The sun is blinding. I see an old poster. Glory to some Congress of the CPSU Central Committee. And suddenly I feel horror. I stop. And at that moment, in this silence, I hear a scream, "Boy, stop." Running workers in orange robes. The wire came off. If I ran further, I would be screwed. That's why I feel the horror of the day.
The geometry, ideal to lifelessness, the eye burning white and the deep hot blue sky, a hellish combination. The fear of noon is an uncanny valley, just in relation to all reality.
Artists who painted this: Giorgio de Chirico, Edward Hopper. Games that resemble the feeling, Neverhood. Serious Sam, Pathologic. So, that is it for now. Of course, there are many more stories and theories. I selected only the most vivid ones. Let's see how it goes. Maybe someone here has experienced this and a conversation will start and then I will translate more. Or the thread will drown. I'm okay with that too.
Not very on point, but screw it. I used to have a recurring dream. It was bright and cloudless, sky blue, no sun in sight. Nothing else in view other than an evenly cone-shaped mountain with a spherical boulder balancing on top. Throughout these dreams, I could only imagine the boulder either balancing precariously on the peak of the mountain or falling to either the right or left of my point of view. Whenever the boulder would get low enough and start to reach my peripheral vision, but not completely disappear, the boulder would reset. I just remember the dream being really bright and a feeling that beyond what was in front of me there was no sane universe. That was all there was left. I always awoke from this dream very unsure of the real world. I felt like it was questioning my own perception of reality.
When most people think of California, images of cities, beaches and redwoods come to mind, but in the Central Valley things are very different. There are three distinct terrifying things about the valley. Our orchards, while beautiful in bloom, become nightmarish when they die. When driving through it can be almost impossible to tell if you have traveled 10 miles or 10 feet. Strange things happen out there because there are countless drifters that make camp deep in the organized road forest. Flat, desolate wastelands await you once you make it out of the orchards. Small trailers dot the landscape in suffocating isolation. The wind doesn't blow out here for 5 months out of the year. It's silent, still and brutal under the bleaching sun. Finally, the chile fog. The fucking fog. You can't see across the street, let alone deep into the rows of the orchards or the vast emptiness of the wasteland. Sound is muffled and breathing becomes difficult from all the debris in the air. You can't see anything even though you know there is nothing to see.
In fact, all this should express or be an attempt to this expression. The efforts made to achieve the goal, the stop of the internal dialogue. And actually the day horror itself is this very tool for achieving the result. Not just stopping, but something like cementing, freezing, blocking, crystallizing thoughts inside the brain, inside character, inside spirit. Cementing, but not in cement, but in viscous resin. Freezing, but not in ice, but in durable, non-cracking amber. Crystallization, but not atomic structural, but semi-fantastic. Transmutation energetic, transforming a stopped, frozen thought into a crystalline shell, transforming this thought into a radiation of pure awareness. Understanding divided by perception. In other words, a person who finds himself on a sunny, calm day on an empty street, catches this very feeling of horror and ceases to perceive, perhaps, entirely, possibly, only partially local reality logically, evaluatively divided by critically, cognitively, etc. Instead, the emotionality, sensuality, empathy of our observed patient soars to the limit. Everything observed, and sunlight, and the smells of heat, and the blue of the sky, and shadows on the walls, the general geometry of the surrounding area and a sense of space. Many other, certainly bright details, all this becomes part of the observer himself. Yes, so strong and sharp, so noisy screaming that it is, of course, shocking. Shocking to horror. Although some, which should not be forgotten, get great pleasure from it.
Here I looked at your creep pictures and caught the same feeling that I once experienced while driving in the summer on my great northern towns and riding up to a career with huge blocks of square stones. It would seem that nothing special, the forest, shit, pines, stones, friends nearby, just a moment ago they joked with each other, they did not think about anything gloomy. And then I looked at these huge, geometrically smooth rocks, at an empty blue sky above my head, without any hint of horizon, climbed high, at the shabby small pine trees, flat gray ground under my feet, and here it happened. The place was terribly familiar. Either in the horror films, the subconscious has outlined these simple forms, or the tourist folder has taken to similar scary places, or seen enough of such landscapes in films about Siberian camps. Or all this together and at once. There was a feeling of not even approaching death, but rather a smoldering feeling that I had already died and failed in the textures of this world, and I would never find an exit into the real world again. In short, we got out of there, a positive attitude weathered out of me for a week at least, and I still remember those places sometimes. If you think logically, then our eyes are more accustomed to wild, disordered and rich in detail landscapes of nature, while the brain, on the contrary, is inclined to streamline and simplify everything. All these simple, even, geometric pictures, the most intense in color, can really cause some kind of frightening, familiar feeling. Too familiar. Straight from the fantasies of our own sick mind.
Question, curiously. There is so much in common in the stories. Calm, blinding sun. Silence. Some cubes, stones and statues. Where is it from? Anon. Answer, this is what we are trying to find out. My friend. But clearly there is some connection with antiquity. With something very, very old, primitive. The more primitive the forms, the stronger they act.
Excerpt from the book, House of Silence, by Orhan Pamuk. Let them come and ask about it. I am waiting for this time to calmly and simply answer them that way. But below, everything is quiet again. I got out of bed, look at the clock on the table, it's already 10 in the morning. Where are they? I went to the window and looked out into the garden. The machine abandoned by Metten stands in its original place. And then I noticed that the cicadas, who had been singing for weeks next to the kitchen door, were also not heard. I'm afraid of silence. I wonder why the pharmacist came? Although I do not think that her arrival is connected with something. But the dwarf, probably, now tells them everything, gathered them around him and whispers about old sin. I immediately left the room, went to the stairs, hit the floor with a stick and called. Recep, Recep, immediately go upstairs. For some reason, now I knew that he would not come, that I would vainly knock with a stick and in vain strain my old voice, but I called again. And when I called, a strange horror gripped me. It seemed to me that they all left somewhere, without telling me, left forever and would not return, but I was left in the house alone. Fearfully. To distract myself, I screamed again, and this time I was even more scared. It seemed that no one was left in the world, there were no people, no birds, no arrogant dogs, not even cicadas, reminding me of their singing about time and heat. It was as if time had stopped and I was left alone, and now my voice, in fear and without any hope, calls someone again, calls in vain, for nothing, and the stick is hopelessly knocking on the IOL, and no one hears me. There were only abandoned armchairs, chairs, tables with a thick layer of dust, closed doors, sad objects creaking on their own. This is the death you discovered, Celia Hatton. Oh my God. For some reason, it seemed to me that my thoughts would freeze like all objects, and would become colorless and tasteless like ice, and I would forever stand here in silence. Suddenly, I decided to go downstairs to find time and movement, and with difficulty went down 4 steps, but when my head was spinning, I was again afraid. There are 15 steps ahead, you won't be able to go down, Fatma, you'll fall. In a panic, I went back very slowly, and while I went upstairs, with my back to the frightening silence, I wanted to think about something fun and forget about it. Now they will come and kiss your hand, do not be afraid, Fatma. The demon of despondency, also called midday, Psalm 90 verse 6, is the worst of all demons. He proceeds to the monk at about 4 o'clock and besieges him until the 8th hour. First of all, this demon makes the monk notice that the sun is moving very slowly or completely remains motionless and the day becomes like 50 hours. Then the demon compels the monk to constantly look out the window and jump out of his cell to look at the sun and find out how much is left before 9 o'clock, or to see if any of the brethren are nearby. This demon also inspires the monk with hatred for the chosen place, kind of life and manual labor, as well as the thought that love has dried up and there is no one who could comfort him. And, as they say, he goes to great lengths tricks for a monk to leave his cell and to flee his field. At noon, exactly at noon, it's even worse. You look around the horizon. Dry vapors of arable land stand in the frozen air, the earth is burning, the peasants say. The sultry breaths of the earth do not flutter. A merciless luminary nails every leaf into a cracked, damp soil, crushes with streams of heavy light, then the sky is pouring a shower of molten gold. Hard and creepy. In limp horror everything is silent, languid, quieted down before the powerful Moloch. If only a painful hour has passed. You run, and someone is chasing. If you want to shout, you don't dare. Yes, and you are not alone, the whole creature has gone inside itself, the whole creature, frozen, is waiting. It seems that the noon demon is not gentle to the midnight demon. This is not my mysticism. I'm afraid of it. No soul will be revealed at night or day. And I would not want to die in these terrible hours. Was waiting. A pile of sand scattered soundlessly and lay down at my feet. Confused, I turned around. Mother was not visible in the window, but I did not dare to jump up and run to her. The silence continued. Only the small waves of the bay evenly ran and ran, they ran and ran away, ringing a little audibly, leaving a wet footprint in the sand. It was completely calm. The calm was inside me. I held my breath. Only smoothly, my heart was beating hard. How long it lasted, I could not say. Now I know well what silence is. She comes at the turn of a sultry summer day, at noon. Burnt by heat, the birds become silent, predators, soaring from dawn in the sky on their spread wings, hide in the shade, the fish stops playing on the mirror of rivers and ponds, it goes deeper into the dark underwater thickets, and even water lilies hide their yellow and white cups under water. Heat. Calmness. The sun stands steeply. And the hotter the day, the more surprising this calm occurs in nature. You can feel it only in the forest, in the field, on the sea, in the city it is imperceptible.
There's an abject feeling that comes with the stillness of midday. I felt it all the time as a kid to the point where I actually disliked the summertime as a young child. Part of that is that I grew up on a prairie. Wyoming high plain to be exact. I've heard the climate is very similar to much of Russia, incidentally. I don't really want to wax poetic about the uncanniness that's felt because it's very complex and probably multifaceted. One thing I'll say is it's hard to feel inside a town and almost impossible to feel inside a city in my experience unless you find yourself on the dusty, quiet ends of towns where you find junkyards and storage complexes. The conditions are perfect when the crunch of gravel under your feet cuts like a knife through the still air with only the chorus of grasshoppers to greet it. Getting a little waxy, I know.
Because at night you are not afraid of emptiness, but of what is in it. And on the contrary, in the afternoon, this emptiness depresses you, because from the day you expect revitalization. We are afraid of living in darkness and a dead day. Indeed, it should be the opposite.
I think that the matter lies in the color palette of these same paintings. I have been following the threads for a long time, and almost all the paintings have high contrast, a dark sky, an invisible source of lighting, bright earth. Of course, such a contrast will leave an unpleasant feeling. Or, for example, the contrast of the image as a whole, or its brightness, as in the paintings of that anonymous that brought the paintings of Angel Planels and Felix Labisse. It is clearly visible there. Using the example of De Chirico, here are some conclusions that can be drawn about what causes the creepy effect. 1. Contrast. Bright earth, dark sky, brightly lit light objects, sharp shadows. Above I already wrote about this. 2. The perspective. Many other artists from this thread have it distorted and some kind of weird shit happens to it. Sometimes different types of perspective are used simultaneously, for example, on the second pic related, linear and inverse. Even if a person does not understand what is exactly wrong with it, then he still notices it, and this obviously causes some kind of cognitive dissonance. 3. Perhaps sometimes we are dealing with megalophobia and agoraphobia, people are negligible compared to the environment, and the environment itself is a wide open space. In addition, people are alone, they are divided into pairs, no one else is around, although in theory we have a bright day here. It seems to me that this causes a feeling of abandonment and some kind of danger. As usual, we went to bed in a mortar. I fell asleep instantly and woke up in the middle of the day. Julia was not around. For some reason, I was immediately scared. Jumped to the site, began to look around. The sun flooded the bastions. The silence rang. The blades of grass did not move. It was desolate and lonely to horror. "Julia," I called softly. He did not respond. For some reason, screaming, calling out loud was very scary. I silently began to look for Julia. We went out into the silence of the sun. This silence just fell upon us in heavy boulders. Everything was familiar, the yellow walls of the bastions, asleep guns, grass, stones. And the distant distances around. But now I was gripped by an incomprehensible fear. I never thought that a sunny day could be creepy, like a night in a cemetery. Silence just tore the ears with its ringing. Julia, apparently, was also bad. He gripped my elbow with both hands. "Julia," I whispered. "Maybe we'll take a chance. Even if they fire, they may not fall. It's hard to get on the fly." Julia nodded hastily. I blew the key. Krapovin, Children of the Blue Flamingo.
Very interesting that other people have made this into a thing. I get this every once in a while, but I don't necessarily find it scary all the time. Most of the time it just makes me sort of dissociate, but it does feel like there is potential for something bad to happen. Would you say this phenomenon is related to liminal spaces? To elaborate on my own experiences, I used to get this feeling when I went to the school by my house during the summer. There was a big concrete area, and when it was really hot and dry, and there were almost no shadows anywhere, I would go up there and there were no other kids there, and it felt like I was at the crossroads of some other dimension. I also got this many times when I smoked weed and was out in the sun in some grassy areas where the dirt was really dry and cracked. To go against one of the criteria for this, I actually have had it happen on water before, when I went on a long canoe trip, and it was hot and the sun was beating down in the middle of the lake and the water was really calm. On that same canoe trip I went to an area that burned down, all the woods in that area, several years before, and it was like a desert with dead trees standing up and just sand and brush. I would agree with another anon on here that it is like an uncanny valley effect. Maybe the stillness, the dry heat, and the way the shadows are, or a complete lack of shadows, somehow makes us feel like it is a foreign environment, and that we shouldn't be there, like reality is somehow not working properly, so there is a fear that it will somehow fall apart at the seams and will fall into the void along with reality itself. I really don't know what it is, but it's a cool thread.
There is no blue day horror. There is yellow. There is even a crimson, like a fiercely hot evening in London at King's Crouch End. When the cicadas ring and it's hot. Like in a sauna. For me, daytime horror is precisely yellow. But only. I watched it 100 times in the field. As a child I remember there was a strange feeling, not fear, but just hidden anxiety in the fields. When we drove potatoes to spud. Around nobody. And the crickets are popping. The wires on the poles are visible in the distance. Or in July on Vasilevsky Island. Or in the area of Technolozhka. In DS2. There is not anyone. Everyone hid in their wells, and only dust and rare cars drive through. And the heat. And silence. But here's the strange thing, I don't remember the remote control in places with water. A lake, a river. A sea, maybe this is just me, or maybe others have it. Does water neutralize this feeling?
Wow, cool story. Yes, it can happen around water areas, just more rarely, I think. I just post posts from old threads with some stories and theories. I don't agree with them all. For me, this is primarily blue and white. Dense blue, such bluish and white stone of buildings or sand to black. The combination of number 2 is blue and terracotta, such a clay color, brown-pink, especially in all kinds of clay shacks and pyramids. The combination of number 3 is blue and red. Red rocks, with a crimson border illuminated by the sun. And only then, blue and yellow. But blue is always and everywhere. Because blue is a sky unprotected by clouds, open to an endless space, to someone's gaze. Without cold blue, these warm colors do not work. As for the water, I agree. Water pacifies, immediately knocks down the glow. So this feeling is uniquely tied to the heat. But it is not clear what she reassures, the fact that you can drink or the fact that you can plunge.
I walked from the store by the yards. On the hillock there is some kind of a collapsing 5-story building, directly opposite. An abandoned kindergarten, overgrown with greenery. For some reason, a barbed wire was launched along the fence. To a 5-story building, some kind of red brick technical building is attached. I go around the 5-story building. And in the clearing near the brick annex there is a girl of about 7 with a small dog. Both of them are motionless. Everything is very bright. Acidic, the silhouettes of a girl and a dog seem to be illuminated. Poplar fluff is flying in huge flakes. And it seems to glow from the inside. There are almost no shadows. And there are no people except this girl.
It is worth describing the area where I live. The city is very small, although old, southwestern Russia. They started to build the district somewhere in the mid-90s, so I don't have so many concrete 5-story buildings. However, the same typical buildings after the death of the Union cause me much more gloom. The first horror of noon felt in early childhood, in the very beginning of the 2000s. It was not far from a stop near the university, usually crowded, but the day was summer, and it was also the second half of the day off. At some point, the cars passed, leaving the road section completely empty, and the wind stopped caressing the poplars, and their characteristic noise disappeared. Dead silence, no people in sight, not a single one. My brother was walking nearby, but I did not look at him. The sun disgustingly shines. It lasted a few seconds, but I still remember. Horror of noon made my way into my dreams. In short, imagine that the Aztec pyramid was taken and sold to her with fresh concrete. Huge steps will remain, not for human legs, somewhere down. The steps are filled with various debris. The sun is about an hour, probably. And vile, vicious ringing, in the manner of a similar sound transmission line. How many times I dreamed, came down to the end I did not have time, woke up. In general, I was very happy to see this thread and understand that I'm not the only one so crazy.
In his diary, in an entry headed Nice the 22nd of January 1892, Munch wrote, "I was walking along the road with 2 friends. The sun was setting. Suddenly the sky turned blood red. I paused, feeling exhausted, and leaned on the fence. There was blood and tongues of fire above the blue-black fjord and the city. My friends walked on, and I stood there trembling with anxiety. And I sensed an infinite scream passing through nature.
I actually love the sun and quiet. Honestly though, I'm really loving the sound of the insects and wind in the trees this time of year. Makes the heat more bearable." The feeling commented in this thread reminds of Texnalize, more exactly the world of the above, where the theanormals live, is exactly what is being described here, an uncanny and unsettling world stopped in midday forever.
I had these dreams. Nightmares. Usually, all my dreams are set in nighttime scenarios. But the worst nightmares I ever had, when I felt an immense sense of dread, occurred when I dreamed of being in front of a lonely, isolated house. Said house had something inside. I didn't know for sure what it was, but it sent shivers up my spine. The other scenarios were green plains, full of vegetation and mixed terrain, topography. And again all alone by myself, wandering and lost with an oppressive sense of doom.
The horror of noon is likely an ancient survival instinct that we inherited from our ancestors through our genes. Farming and agriculture began around the time of ancient Sumer. For many of our ancestors, leading up to the industrial age, survival depended on toiling the fields in the heat of day. Many laborers would have likely died from sunstroke, dehydration, etc. The window of time around noon would have claimed the most casualties. Because it is generally the hottest point of the day, many species inherit survival instincts from previous generations. Humans are no different. We feel uneasy about noon because we have survival instincts telling us that it presents a danger.
Oh, I actually know this feeling. Here's my example. Sitting in a field in the prairies, just by a tree, nothing else but field and sky. Nice scene, like a pleasant still picture. But as your brain relaxes, and starts to just average out. The constant stimuli, the cacophony of sounds of different leaves and grasses rustling starts to just kind of blend into a monotone white noise. The lightly stirring motions of the individual blades of grasses all blend together into just one big overall generic blur of light motion. The heat waves and rays of the sun blend together into generic glowing warmth that have flooded the atmosphere like a thick fluid that weighs you down. You start to realize that every ant is just a generic component of the blur that is, ants, every piece of bark no different than any other piece of bark on any other tree. All just generic pieces of a generic whole, to be condensed into form and gradually dispersed back into entropy, over and over and over, no one ever being truly like any before or after it, but such individuality inherently meaning absolutely nothing. Your mind relaxes more and more, all the components of the world blend together more and more, and you keep getting weighed down, sinking into the nothingness of infinity, losing your sense of self more and more the more you just realize that this is all just generic nature, that this is all just generic life, that you, and everything that makes you, you, means about as much as any of these blades of grass or pieces of bark, and right before you are about to fade away into the blur. Right before you drown in the suffocatingly warm light and blurry white noise of everything, right before your mind finally relaxes into nothingness, never to be retrieved, and you just abandon all sense of individual thought, becoming like a wild animal that lives only on instinct and vague senses. The explosion. But I wouldn't call it an explosion, more like someone dragging your drowning ass up out of the anti-ocean right before you lose consciousness and slip away, and getting that first big breath of air. What often helps is some distraction that drags us back into our little human consciousness constructed town of our lives that exists isolated in an endless field of eternal generic nothingness of nature/real life that threatens to swallow us every day, and one day, inevitably will. Maybe a friend calls to you, or a car drives past. But sometimes, if you are really far from our little island of humanity, there are no distractions to come and save your mind from being swallowed by the nothingness. In this case, it's like that Russian guy mentioned, the voice that calls your name, the arm that pulls you up out of the anti-ocean and saves you from the brink of drowning, is your own. It's your soul/mind/consciousness, making a Hail Mary throw to save itself from being swallowed by nature, from being drowned by eternity. You suddenly remember yourself, your mind, your individuality, your everyday life, and you can distract yourself once again. Your consciousness scrambles back onto its little island and dries off. But that sea is never ending, and stretches in all directions. The little artificial island of human individuality, of humanity, will one day be washed away like a sand castle. We, and the things we construct, and all we have stood for and become, are the aberrations. For eternity before us and for eternity afterward, the generic thoughtless blur of nature is reality. We, and our lives here, are simply illusions. Humanity is just a little magic trick, smoke and mirrors. And on those hot summer afternoons, in the middle of the day, in the middle of the season, in the middle of the year, in the middle of a single minute, that eternity of nothingness that is true reality washes up on your shore and submerges you.
Oh, I totally get this. It happens when everything is most still, in those almost bland-looking parts of nature. For me, the best way I can describe it is that I start to panic, because it feels like I'm trapped in a picture. Like, I feel like I have to start running back to anything with variance and chaos, to remind myself that I'm not trapped in an eternal still life scene, that I'm not going to find the edge of the picture that traps me in the genericness of everything, because the sheer, natural order of everything is almost intimidating, like nature reminding you that just as one of those leaves would blow off, fly away, and die, never to be noticed or remembered, so too will you, so too will every human. Pan is the embodiment of nature. Calling such a disturbing moment a meeting with Pan is not inaccurate.
Whoever thou mayest be, beloved stranger, whom I meet here for the first time, avail thyself of this happy hour and of the stillness around us and above us, and let me tell thee something of the thought which has suddenly risen before me like a star which would fain shed down its rays upon thee and every one, as befits the nature of light. Fellow man, your whole life, like a sandglass, will always be reversed and will ever run out again. A long minute of time will elapse until all those conditions out of which you were evolved return in the wheel of the cosmic process. And then you will find every pain and every pleasure, every friend and every enemy. every hope and every error, every blade of grass and every ray of sunshine once more, and the whole fabric of things which make up your life. This ring in which you are but a grain will glitter afresh forever. And in every one of these cycles of human life there will be 1 hour where, for the first time, one man, and then many, will perceive the mighty thought of the eternal recurrence of all things. And for mankind this is always the hour of noon. Nietzsche.
Even when midday is perceived as the time of fullness and maximum strength, it brings with it a sense of something so absolute that, more often than not, man has not felt himself to be a match for it. Thus it is a spot of time that has tended to overmaster man, menacing and bewildering him, suspending him in a state of indecision, or casting him into an inactive torpor, or filling him with panic, or numinous dread. This is especially the case when it is a midday during the height of summer. For then the Sunday may appear not as beneficent Helios or Apollo but as the hostile Gorgon. Fierce or enervating heat, unshadowed, absolute light, and uncanny silence combine to make noontide, especially in the Mediterranean lands, a time of the negative demonic power of nature. It is connected with the sensation of an absolute suspension in which timelessness is experienced. Where the midday stasis is experienced as a pausa infinita. And eternity actually appears as a quality in things, a quality that is seen, as it were. At noon, clarity, light, and heat become something absolute, cease to be functions, are transformed into concrete substances, and replace all other concrete substances. Midday threatens to destroy the world that was built up by the morning. In this paradox of light which is the southern noon, things lose their contours which only a tempering of light can give them, movements cease, and sound becomes impotent while in its place the silence becomes audible. The heat and light of noon are paralyzing.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.